Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar as a part of GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar series. My name is Sarah Torian, and I'm a consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and I have the honor of hosting and moderating today's conversation. But before we get started, I wanted to go over a couple of quick housekeeping details. First, I invite you to use the chat box function on the side of the screen to sign in. Let us know your name, your organization, and the name of your GLR coalition if you're a part of one. Also, I wanted to let you know that this webinar is being recorded today, and we'll share the link to that recording with you via email in this week's GLR Learning Tuesdays weekly newsletter. In addition, I'd just like to ask you to please mute yourself right now and during the presentation so that we can avoid any background noises or distractions while our speakers are talking. And also wanted to share that we will be posting a short survey poll after the presentations to elicit your feedback and thoughts on today's webinar as a part of our effort to continuously improve and strengthen our efforts and ensure that these online learning events are really meeting your needs and supporting you in your work. And then finally, I'd like to encourage you to post any questions that you might have or share any major takeaways that come to you during these presentations in the chat box again on the side of the screen. And then we'll follow up with some of those during the Q&A portion of the webinar. Now I'd like to give a little bit of background and context for GLR Learning Tuesdays. As you can see on the screen right now, we've got a number of great sessions planned for later on this month and more coming in future months. Same day of the week, same time, and we're hoping that this regular schedule will give us the opportunity to bring to the GLR network a more predictable and reliable set of learning opportunities. We're going to continue using the webinar format as a portal to access and explore the best science, ideas, and programs related to third grade reading proficiency. And we expect that these conversations will inform, inspire, and energize us all with an eclectic mix of presenters who will bring knowledge derived from research, practice, as well as lived experience. So I hope that you'll continue to save this date and time and make plans to join us for more of these great learning events. Next slide, please. Today's conversation is going to kick off our Emerging Models series, which is a part of GLR Learning Tuesdays, designed to lift up innovative and new approaches and strategies to help GLR learning coalitions get better at getting better. The emerging model that we're featuring today is the First 10 Schools and Communities model, which is promoting collaborations between schools, school districts, and the early learning and family support fields. So first, we'll hear from David Jacobson. Can we go to the next slide? Thanks. David Jacobson, as he provides an overview of the First 10 Schools and Communities model. And then after that, we'll hear from leaders in two GLR communities where they are applying this model now. David is the Principal Technical Advisor at the Education Development Center in Waltham, Massachusetts, and there he works with states, districts, and communities to improve early education and care for low-income children and their families. He specializes in building effective prenatal through grade 3 systems in order to close achievement gaps, reduce inequality, and build strong communities. And recently, he conducted extensive research into schools and communities that are attempting to address educational inequity by applying innovative strategies in an effort to ensure that all children receive what they need in order to reach their full potential. So welcome, David. We're so glad that you could join us today.
Thank you, Sarah. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank Sarah, Ralph Smith, Yoli Flores, Suzanne for having me and for organizing the webinar. I appreciate the opportunity to share some of the exciting work that's happening around the country, and I'm looking forward to our discussion with Brook and Cris and to the Q&A with all of you. So as Sarah said, I work at the Education Development Center, EDC, and all of my work focuses, next slide, Suzanne. All of my work focuses on collaboration between schools and early childhood programs, and specifically on community initiatives to improve programs and services for children and families throughout the first 10 years of children's lives. I do this both through technical assistance and practical applied research, and as Sarah said, for the past several years, I've been conducting research on leading edge schools and communities that are working to improve teaching and learning, that are strengthening partnerships with families, and that are providing comprehensive services to children and families. This research was supported by the Heising-Simons Foundation. You can advance, Suzanne, Foundation in California. And I published a study that Sarah referred to at the end of April, All Children Learn and Thrive, Building First 10 Schools and Communities. You can find that at first10.org, and that's what I'll be drawing from in our conversation today. So, yep, great. So I began this research by interviewing a wide range of national leaders to identify communities that were doing this work. And then I interviewed 18 leaders in 18 communities. And in the study, I discussed 8 of these communities in detail, almost all of which I visited, and I talk about several other communities as well. I'd like to begin now with a few artifacts from a couple of these site visits. The first is from the middle of the country, and it's a slide in a presentation by the leadership team at Sandos Elementary School. This is a Title I school outside of Omaha, Nebraska. And I'd like to draw your attention to this idea of redefining the Sandos mindset birth through grade 5. This is a school that's engaging families in the life of the school years before children enter kindergarten. The principal introduced herself as the principal of the birth through 5th grade school, and here's how she sums up the Sandos mindset. From the moment you walk in that door all the way to our 5th grade classrooms, from our home visiting families and our youngest children in the neighborhood, they all learn here. So we'll talk more about what this means in practice, but as a preview, Sandos does this through home visiting of children ages 0 to 3 and parent-child interaction groups with young children and their families, and by connecting these families to health and social services. So next, I'd like to show you some artifacts from Cambridge, Massachusetts. While known for its universities, Cambridge is also home to a large number of low-income families. Here's a photo of teachers in 9, if you actually go to the previous slide. Here's a photo of teachers from 9 early childhood centers working together as part of a quality improvement initiative that includes mentoring for directors, and then for teachers, coaching, professional development, and communities of practice. And then the next slide is a photo of a similar initiative for family child care providers. These 2 quality improvement initiatives are part of a multi-pronged strategy in Cambridge. Next slide. That includes the development of a home visiting system throughout the city, significant efforts to improve family engagement and parenting education, the transition to kindergarten plan, a new kindergarten curriculum, and professional development in the early grades of elementary school. So what I think is important and exciting is that the initiatives in Sandos Elementary, in Cambridge, and in Multnomah County, and the other communities that I studied are integrally related. They're part of the same trend, and they're part of an emerging model based on a coherent set of structures and a coherent set of strategies. These initiatives are emerging in different parts of the country, and interestingly, they developed independently of each other. And but they're responding to similar challenges. And so to anchor our discussion, I'd like to briefly discuss those common challenges. Decades of research, next slide. Decades of research on the science of early childhood demonstrate that there's a striking contrast between what children need in order to learn and thrive and what they experience in programs and services. They need consistent quality throughout the first decade. They need alignment across the age span as children grow older, and they need for the programs and services that they experience to be coordinated at each stage of development. Unfortunately, however, the programs and services that serve young children and their families are highly fragmented. There are gaps, next slide. There are gaps between public and private programs. There are large gaps between early 0 to 5, early childhood and education and care, and K-12 education and care, and there are gaps between education, health, and social services. And so as a result, children experience inconsistent quality, next slide, gaps across the age span, and a lack of coordination at each stage of development. So in response to this state of affairs, two education reform movements have emerged. The first is what we call the prenatal through grade 3 movement, or P3 movement. And the focus of the P3 movement is quality at each stage of development, improving quality, and aligning instruction, particularly between preschool and the early elementary grades. And the P3 movement tends to focus on teaching and learning, on the academic side of the equation. The second movement is the community schools and comprehensive services movement. And here, schools or early childhood programs partner with health and social service agencies to meet the needs of children and families. So these, what I have found is that these two movements are converging. There's a new wave of initiatives that draw from both the P3 and community schools movements, and that's what I went out to study. And what I found first is that all of the initiatives I studied began with a commitment to educational equity. These are initiatives that are directed towards low-income children and families, and they're committed to the idea that all children receive what they need in order to develop to their full potential. This requires eliminating disparities based on income, race, and other factors. Many of the communities that I'll discuss have made significant financial investments in this work. That includes the initiatives that Brook and Cris will talk about. And in these cases, and in most of the cases I described, these initiatives are supported with public funds. I do want to mention here that I've now shared this research with a number of communities, including 13 in Maine and 16 communities in Pennsylvania. And I've been very pleased to see this work take off in less resource-rich environments. And if we have an opportunity, we can talk about that later. So another feature of this convergent model is that schools and communities are forming partnerships with the aim of strengthening schools, families, and community institutions through mutually reinforcing collaboration. This is based on the idea that schools, families, and communities are highly interdependent. The success of each is bound up with the success of others. And this is an idea that's very much backed up by the research. And finally, I also found that these school and community partnerships focused on 4 roles or 4 sets of strategies. And we'll be talking about these more in depth, but, and I'll give you examples of each of these. But by way of preview, the partnerships that I studied focused on 4 sets of strategies: to support professional collaboration to improve teaching and learning, coordinate comprehensive services, promote culturally responsive partnerships with families, and provide strategic leadership and ongoing assessment. So this convergence of these two movements is in my view, an important development. It is sufficiently distinctive and sufficiently backed by the research, I argue, to warrant its own name. So, and next slide, I follow 2 well-known early childhood experts, Arthur Reynolds and Judy Temple, in defining early childhood as roughly the first decade of life. And I refer to this convergent model as first 10 schools and communities. And next slide, there are a number of benefits to using the term first 10. First, as I said, this is a distinctive combination that merits its own name. But the term first 10 also makes it really clear that this work is a collaboration between schools and districts on the one hand and early childhood organizations on the other. And further, some elementary schools are adopting this approach as part of their identity. And in these schools, the work doesn't stop at 3rd grade. The alignment work and the comprehensive services continue throughout elementary school. So now I'd like to talk about the structures that schools and communities are creating to organize this work, and then the strategies they're implementing. And first 10 initiatives, as I have found them, take 2 forms. The first is, I refer to as a first 10 community partnership. And the defining feature of a first 10 community partnership is that it includes multiple elementary schools within a zone or a district, multiple early childhood centers and Head Start programs within that same zone or district, multiple family child care providers, etc. The second structure is a first 10 school hub. And the defining feature of a school hub is that it's centered around a single elementary school. The school develops relationships with families with young children before the children enter school. continues to support them after they enter school, and the school also develops relationships, in some cases, with early childhood centers, Head Starts, family child care, and health and social service providers. So now you may be wondering, are these mutually exclusive? Couldn't a community do both? And the answer is yes. Note, this is what that would look like. You can note the small little hubs within the larger community partnership. I don't know of any current examples of this, but one of my recommendations in the study is that this would be a very powerful combination. So now let me give you a few examples of what First 10 initiatives do. And we'll begin with professional collaboration to improve teaching and learning in Normal, Illinois. This is farm country, far from Chicago, where they began with joint professional development for pre-K and K teachers. That joint professional development led to a series of collaborative discussions, which in turn led to cross-grade classroom visitations. And out of this process, each group of teachers, the pre-K teachers and the K teachers, with leadership support, embarked on a series of what I call reciprocal improvements. The pre-K teachers decided that they, having visited kindergarten classrooms and had conversations with kindergarten teachers, they decided they needed to work on concept development and longer thematic investigations. And the kindergarten teachers did some study, they did a program of research, and they ended up implementing a daily block of structured play. So that's one example of professional collaboration to improve teaching and learning. And in the study, I share many more variations of this. But now I'll move to the second role that First 10 partnerships play, and that's to coordinate comprehensive services. And for this, let's return to Sandoz Elementary School and the work that Cris Lopez Anderson leads in Metro Omaha. So Cris leads a pilot in 10 schools in the Metro Omaha area. This initiative is paid for by a 2-county collaborative that encompasses 11 school districts. The Buffett Early Childhood Center is contracted to provide technical assistance to the pilot by the 2-county collaborative. That is, it receives money. And so again, these are public funds paying for the pilot. That's something we always have to emphasize, as since when people hear the term Buffett, sometimes they think it's private money that's paying for this work. So in this pilot project, each school in the pilot has a home visitor, a family facilitator, and an education facilitator. The education facilitator acts as an instructional coach for the early grades and supports the professional collaboration on teaching and learning that we just discussed. The home visitor supports children ages 0 to 3 in their families. The family facilitator supports children ages 0 to 8 in their families. And together they run 2 parent-child interaction sessions per month. They build relationships with the families, they build trust with the families, and they connect them to health and services. At Sandoz, the parents so appreciated the opportunity to meet with other parents in the parent-child interaction sessions, they began to feel comfortable in the school, and they ended up asking, could we get together more often? Often, as you know, low-income families are very isolated, and that they felt so comfortable in the school was really a positive development. And so the school began to institute weekly coffees every Friday morning. That's a great example of family engagement, and that leads us to our third role that First 10 partnerships play, and that is promoting culturally responsive partnerships with families. Now, excuse me. So, promoting culturally responsive partnerships with families is related to comprehensive services, but here we're talking about engaging families in substantive ways, going beyond superficial random acts of family engagement, partnering with families and supporting their children, developing parent and family leadership. And a good example of this is found in the P3 pilot in Multnomah County, Oregon, that Brook Chilton-Timmons leads. Multnomah County has established a system of 90 community schools throughout the county. Those are the blue tacks on this map. Each of these community schools has a site manager who manages an after-school program and engages families in the life of the school and coordinates health and social services. The P3 pilot is in 9 schools, and it's supported by state funds. And in this pilot, each of the schools has a P3 coordinator who works with the community school site manager. Each P3 coordinator runs at least 2 play and learn groups per week. And like in Metro Omaha, in addition to what the families learn and experience in the play and learn groups, so singing, playing, reading aloud, movement, child development, they also build relationships with the family, with the other families and with the P3 coordinator, who then connects the families to health and social services and needed. And one interesting feature of the P3 pilot in Multnomah County is that family child care providers and their children also participate in these play and learn groups. So there are 3 specific ways that the P3 pilot in Multnomah County builds culturally responsive partnerships with families. I mentioned that each P3 coordinator runs 2 play and learn groups a week. One of these is required to be in a different language or to be specifically for a culturally specific group. So that's one way. Further, Multnomah County chose a model that from Seattle called the kaleidoscope model for its play and learn group approach. And this model includes significant parent participation and leadership in the play and learn groups, and even some participation in the design of the play and learn group sessions. And then third, the county has developed a network of community organizations that have deep linguistic and cultural expertise in serving culturally specific groups. Multnomah County is a very diverse county, and so the P3 coordinators are actually employees of these organizations, and they're supported by these community agencies in partnering with families. The fourth role that First 10 partnerships play is to provide strategic leadership and ongoing assessment of their work. Most of these communities began their work, next slide, by assessing needs and gathering stakeholder input. They've developed strong strategic plans. They've designed leadership structures to implement the plans. They meet regularly to monitor implementation, coordinate work, and solve implementation challenges. And a good example of the use of a strategic plan is found in the Cambridge initiative we discussed at the beginning. So yes, great. And this plan is centered around 5 broad strategic goals: access and affordability, program quality, family engagement and partnership, access to quality health care, and shared governance and leadership. Cambridge created then a steering committee as a governance structure, and 3 subcommittees: access and quality, health, and family engagement and partnership, to carry out these strategies. So here, the next slide has some of the key strategies that the Cambridge Birth through 3rd Grade Partnership has implemented over the past 3.5 years. This is a comprehensive set of strategies that range across the full First 10 continuum. So I've now used Normal, Illinois, and Metro Omaha, Multnomah County, and Cambridge, each to identify one of these roles and one of these sets of First 10 strategies, but in different ways, they each do all of them. So for example, in Cambridge's work, we see professional collaboration around teaching and learning in the 2 quality pilots, in the development of a home visiting system, which for instance will include common professional development for all home visitors, and in the transition to kindergarten plan, which will bring together preschool and kindergarten teachers for joint professional development. We see comprehensive services in the home visiting systems work, in the early childhood mental health consultation, and in parenting education programs. And we see partnerships with families in a citywide family engagement definition and in an array of programs that support families and engage them as partners. And this, as I've suggested, is all part of a strategic plan, replete with implementation benchmarks and overseen by a steering committee and 3 subcommittees. Now, in the next slide, I want to acknowledge that this work is not challenge-free. In the study, I discussed the challenges and obstacles that arise as schools and communities create partnerships and implement these strategies. I won't go into detail here, but it's important that schools and communities know what to expect when taking this work on. So I refer to this framework in the next slide as the First 10 theory of action. A theory of action is a way of telling a story about how strategies and actions will lead to outcomes. It's a way of laying out your expectations and setting yourself up to monitor and adjust as you move forward. So the first 10 story, the first 10 theory of action reads like this. If first 10 school hubs and community partnerships perform these 4 roles that we've discussed, with the explicit aim of promoting mutually reinforcing collaboration and improvement among effective schools, nurturing families, and strong communities, then communities will promote educational equity and close opportunity gaps, and all children will learn and thrive. We have some, I'm happy to say, we have some positive data emerging from these efforts. We have rising class scores and rising ECHR scores, common measures of classroom quality in Cambridge's quality pilots. And in Metro Omaha, where we have our most robust evaluation, we're seeing that children in home visiting who are receiving home visiting are showing increases in language development. And in classrooms in the Metro Omaha pilot schools, we're seeing that teacher-child interactions are improving, that instruction is improving, language development has improved for children in grades pre-K through grade 3, and early educational attainment is increasing. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. You can find the study at first10.org, and I look forward to our discussion with Brook and Cris.
Thank you so much, David. That was a wonderful overview of the First 10 model and how it is bringing partners together to address children's needs and avoid that fragmentation and those gaps that you were talking about that can hinder their progress. And it's exciting to hear about some of the positive outcomes that this approach is already beginning to achieve. So as we transition now from hearing from David to hearing from some of the local leaders that are applying this model, I'd just like to remind everyone to use the chat box to post any questions that you may have, as well as any insights that these comments and presentations are generating in your mind as you hear them. So now I'd like to welcome Cris Lopez Anderson and Brook Chilton-Timmons to the conversation. Cris Lopez Anderson is the program administrator of the Superintendent's Early Childhood Plan at the Buffett Early Childhood Institute at the University of Nebraska. And there she is supporting efforts in the 11 school districts in Metro Omaha as they work to engage and support children before and after they enroll in kindergarten. Brook Chilton-Timmons is the Early Learning Coordinator in the Multnomah County Department of County Human Services in Oregon. And in that role, she's a part of the Schools Uniting Neighborhoods, or SUN service system that David was talking about earlier, which is working to support a wide array of community-based services for children and families. So welcome, Cris and Brook. So glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. So I thought we could begin with Cris Lopez Anderson from Metro Omaha. Cris, I was wondering if you could tell us, well, in addition to a home visitor and a family facilitator, each of the pilot schools in Metro Omaha is supported by an educational facilitator. Could you tell us a little bit more about the work that those educational facilitators do and the impact that they're having on teaching and learning in those schools?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. The educational facilitators is a unique role in that the home visitor and family facilitator are employed by the school district, and the education facilitators are actually employed by the institute. They are, the first few years when we started, they really worked hard to develop relationships with staff, and they were gathering some general information. But even then, and continuing now, their primary focus is on instructional practices. They're really looking at how those instructional practices are around our big ideas of continuity and quality and equity, and what those practices would look like in students' learning and family engagement, and in the general relationship that the families are having with the school and the community. We really look at always modeling the use of student data and building data to be guiding our practices as we're involved in coaching cycles with staff or in professional development. What is it that we're trying to achieve as we're looking at our ultimate goal in reducing the achievement gap of our students of color and our students of poverty? So they are part of that staff, but try to have that big over that 10,000 view of what's going on and how they can connect the different components of what we call school as a hub that's already part of their school improvement.
Sarah, you're on mute.
Sorry. I apologize.
I was hoping you didn't want me to read your lips, Sarah.
No. From what you're sharing, principals really play a critical role in the first 10 school hubs and in Metro Omaha's birth through third grade model. I was wondering if you could share what you've learned about how principals support this work and how you can gain and sustain their buy-in and commitment.
Yeah, any successful school is really associated with having a really strong educational leader. I think we can all agree on that. And so here, we have principals who typically are K through grade 5, K through grade 6 leaders. They might have a preschool program in their building, but it's typically coordinated through their school district or local Head Start. And all of a sudden, we want them to really start thinking about birth all the way through their elementary year. And that's a really huge paradigm shift when you look at trying to transform public school education and elementary building. So I work very closely with the principals as the educational facilitators, working closely with the teaching staff and coaching them and having reflective conversations with them. I'm having those same type of conversations with the building principals, really giving them some background knowledge on what this is, supporting them where they are, helping them do some landscape assessments as to where are the strengths in my building, where are the next steps in my building, and how can we really work to make this thing called school as a hub. So we have found that those schools that have a strong instructional leader, a visionary, an intentional leader who can really wrap their head around all these different components, have a higher likelihood of being successful. And so with time, and mentoring and coaching, we want to help all our leaders get there.
That's great. Wonderful kind of support to kind of engage them and help encourage them to continue to lead this work. Now I was wondering if we could hear from Brook Chilton-Timmons in Multnomah County, Oregon. Brook, I understand that play and learn groups are a really important component of the P3 pilot in Multnomah County. Could you describe some of the benefits for families of having elementary schools offer play and learn groups? And also, we've already had a question from somebody in the chat box about these groups. They're wondering how structured those sessions are in terms of kind of skill building activities and outcomes. So if you could share a little bit more about that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thank you. So in our community, which I'm sure we are not unique in this, we do not have enough access to early learning opportunities for our families. And so play and learn groups provide an opportunity to really embrace parents as their child's first teacher and provide a supportive and welcoming environment in a school building for them to learn together. The model that we use that David mentioned is called Kaleidoscope. It's from Child Care Resources in Seattle, and it provides a really nice frame for play and learn groups to happen, but to the question of the chat box, it's a really flexible frame. So it has some essential activities that include child-directed play, opportunities for caregivers to build relationships among each other, opportunities for parent leadership and caregiver leadership. It involves a coordinated group activity, and it requires that each play and learn group be 90 minutes. But part of the reason why we chose the Kaleidoscope model is because it provides so much flexibility, particularly for our culturally specific communities, and we wanted a model that was going to work for a group of Vietnamese families who might want something specific, and a group of Spanish-speaking families who are looking for something different. And so we really wanted to provide enough consistency across those 9 sites, but also some flexibility. In addition, we want schools to be places where families feel more comfortable and feel welcome and start building that relationship and start feeling like it's their place and a place where they can advocate for their kids and a place where they can make change. And so Children Learn Group provides the first step to saying you're very important to us and your children are important to us, and to start building those relationships with P3 coordinators, but also with other school staff. You know, we have principals stop by, play and learn groups to say hello and start meeting those families. And we're also able to think about those families and the neighbor caregivers who are in the community, but may be isolated and not already connected to those buildings and to the work that's happening through the schools themselves.
Thank you. One of the things that I was interested in as I heard David talk about Multnomah County, and as you were responding to that question about the Play and Learn group, is that emphasis on reaching families through culturally specific groups. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about how Multnomah County works with and supports culturally specific groups, and how P3 coordinators build those relationships with families through those groups.
Mm-hmm. So in our community school structure and model, we made a shift recently to really focus on culturally specific services. So 60% of our resources overall within the fund service system go to organizations that lead culturally specific services, and that includes our P3 work. And so we're working with agencies who specialize in particular community groups and have so much linguistic and cultural expertise. And so we're really excited to bring that directly to the schools. For many of our P3 coordinators, 8 of 9 of them are women of color. Frequently, they're one of very few people of color as staff in the entire school building. And so it's really powerful for families to have someone who may look like them, who may speak the same language as them. They may be that only person in that building that they feel confident and comfortable connecting with. And so we're really lucky to, again, try and create enough structure where we have consistency across our P3 sites, but really utilize the expertise of the culturally specific community-based organizations that we contract with to do this work and provide that full-time P3 coordinator in the school building. We really think this is an element that can help schools shift how they think about authentically partnering with families and providing those leadership opportunities for families. So rather than have that flyer that goes out to families that tells families when to be there, what to do while they're there, and really positions the schools and teachers as the experts. With this work of the culturally specific organizations, whether it's through Play and Learn groups or we also use parent cafes, it's really coming to families and giving them opportunities to share, some of them share their experience and expertise and support them and partner with them, and kind of shifting how schools are thinking about what family engagement could really look like.
That's great. That's such a wonderful model to hear about. The next question I have is for both of you, Cris and Brook, and David, please feel free to chime in as well, to share what you've seen in other First 10 communities. Given your experience in nurturing and building these partnerships and the connections that are improving teaching and learning across the early learning and early grades periods, and deepening those partnerships with families and providing those comprehensive services to children and families, what advice would you offer to those on the webinar today who might be interested in doing something different, something similar in their communities?
Well, I'll go ahead and go first. I think they should be commended for even wanting to do the work. I think creating partnerships with families in this birth through the first 10 years is an important aspect. And as we look at really making school be what it is for our families and our communities, I think it's important that you know what you're doing well and and build from that. And then look at the gaps that you can have and try to fill some of those gaps with just a different mindset. I'm not sure that we need millions of dollars. Well, having millions of dollars would be great, but I think sometimes we just really need to look at redoing and restructuring and reprioritizing what we have and having that focus, that ultimate outcome that we want. So being very reflective, being very collaborative, how can we join forces to achieve this goal versus trying to work in silos, would be a great advice that I would give.
An example I would give too is thinking about what's already maybe existing in a school community. One example I have from a P3 school is that there was a Head Start located on site with an elementary school, but the Head Start preschool teachers and the kindergarten teachers had never even met each other. So they never really had conversations about the transition into kindergarten and really didn't understand how those instructional practices. And it just put the P3 coordinator saying, let's come together and learn a little bit more. And that's developed into something deeper. But sometimes it's just really about finding those opportunities to collaborate and understanding what's already existing on site.
Do you have anything that you'd like to add, David?
Yes, taking myself off mute. So I would build on what Cris and Brook have said and say that a great place to start is to begin with an initial partnership. That may not be ultimately your everyone that you'll end up bringing in, but begin with an elementary school principal, with perhaps someone from the district, and with a kindergarten teacher, a pre-K teacher, and a preschool director. Head Start programs have been real leaders in these partnerships, given the wealth of experience with comprehensive services and developmentally appropriate practice that they bring. And begin with that partnership, and a great place to start is with a self-assessment. And to say, what are we doing currently? What work do we currently have underway? This is along the lines of what Brook was saying. What work do we currently have underway serving children 0 to 3 in our community? What programs do we have serving 3 to 5? What are we doing around the transition to kindergarten? And what are we doing in the early elementary grades? And to begin to kind of map that out and use that and any other available data. Spend a little time looking for available data in order to say, what are our key needs? And then to develop a plan that addresses, an initial component 0 to 3, 3 to 5, something around the transition to K, and something in the early grades of elementary school. So that would be a suggestion based on communities that I'm seeing doing this work.
Mm-hmm. So we've gotten a question already from Alyssa Mitchell, and she was wondering, David, if you could actually share a little bit more into the challenges that communities can face when implementing this model before we transition.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. And it's a great question, and it's an important question. Suzanne, if you're looking, I think it's slide 33 is the slide with the challenges, or according to my numbers. So what I found in my research is some of the problems that communities run up against are, won't be surprising to you. They're the kinds of challenges that we have working in early childhood and elementary education and care often. So it is sometimes the case that it's challenging to engage district leadership in this work. And a common recommendation that came from the field is the idea that the partnership needs to tailor the work in such a way that it aligns with district priorities. You'll note that both in Metro Omaha, the pilot there spans 11 districts, and in Multnomah County, it spans maybe around 6 districts. Yeah, okay, Brook is nodding her head. So in both cases, it's important for the partnerships then to tailor to district priorities so that the district sees how their priorities are reflected in the work of the partnership. Sometimes I did hear that incorporating these new roles are exciting, but then you have the issue of kind of integrating them into the school. And so are the P3 coordinators and the home visitors, the family facilitators, are they looked at as equals? Are they incorporated into the teaching staff? Do they feel comfortable? And do the principals rely on them just in a kind of segmented way for after school and for partnerships, or are they really part of the school's strategic thinking? And the one thing I would say about the first 10 community partnerships, those broader partnerships, I think a big challenge there, again, this will be familiar, but building the capacity of school leaders to do this work and building the capacity of early childhood center leaders to do this work, who are often so stretched, but in the work of building quality, it's hard for them to even sometimes find time to work on these issues, to attend communities of practice, to sit with their mentors. So those are persistent challenges in those kinds of community partnerships.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. So I noticed that we are very fortunate to have Kate Knudsen, who is the GLR Community Lead in Omaha, Nebraska, on the webinar with us. So Kate, I was wondering if you could chime in and share a little bit about this, the new campaign. I know that the Omaha campaign is fairly new, but could you tell us about what's emerging there, and especially where you see an opportunity to leverage the great work that's already underway as a part of the superintendent's plan?
Hello. You might imagine that we feel extraordinarily fortunate that we have these groups that are already in our community and doing such great work. In fact, I wrote in my plan, we have this magnificent problem that all this wonderfulness is going on. But we do need to leverage that. And we do think that with what the learning community is already doing and the Buffett Institute and Foundation, by the way, we have both, we have representatives from both those organizations on our task force, that they're doing great work, and we can support them and enhance or just notice and tell the community about it. You know, there's different roles that we can play there. Also, MOEC is the background, the Metropolitan Omaha Educational Consortium, and that's the group of all superintendents in the metro area, including Potawatomi County, and then this university leaders on both sides of the river also. And they're doing, I was thinking about David's model, they're doing math cohorts for literacy, or for middle school and high school. They just started a literacy cohort, which will have 1,300 teachers from across all the districts. Every district is representative, that are doing some literacy models, just sort of getting back to basics in literacy. And that's sort of our backbone. That's not my job, but that's the backbone group's work. And then there are several hundred teacher leaders that took those modules with us from the Iowa Reading Research Council. So there's some of that that literacy and being better teachers model. We also know that we need to the campaign needs to get into the community. We need to meet. That's been my work since we were accepted, is to meet people and to ask them to partner with us, to just really know the city better and be in all parts of it. And another aspect, it's just that communication piece. In the school hubs, they know so well that when families feel comfortable there, they're going to come into school feeling better. Their children are going to come into school feeling better. They're going to understand that importance, that imperative of 0 to 3 learning, or the first 10, and that we must get that message out so that everybody in the community understands that this is important, and it's not just a school job. Another thing I'm doing is meeting with mayors, and I had this one mayor just keep directing me back to, let's have you talk to the library, or about the Y is doing some things. And I'm like, no, Mayor, this is your job too. It's everybody's job in the community to understand this importance. And if we're all talking about it, then it becomes normalized, and then everything changes, right? The trajectory for these children changes immediately. So, and then another one of David's parts was just that leadership, and we have a task force of leaders from all around the community, from education, from public health, those civic offices, extended learn, that's after school support. We have a good group that's telling us, how to focus and where we need to lift together. And last, I would say, we've had lots of comments as we've been working that there's so much going on. Like I said at the start, there's so much going on that's wonderful. And perhaps this is that sort of intersectionality that we're all going to come together and then lift, just continue to lift across these communities and really make change happen.
Thank you. Welcome to the network, even though you've been engaged already for about a year, but it's great to hear that, sometimes it's the challenge of so many great things going on, needing to connect all those dots and really leverage all of that. Well, thank you all, David, Cris, Brook, and Kate, for sharing those comments about and information about the First 10 model and how it's being implemented in these two communities. As we transition now to the question and discussion portion of the webinar, I just wanted to let you know that remind you again that we'll be posting a survey poll in just a few moments. And I do hope that you'll just take a quick moment to share your thoughts and feedback with us. Again, this is a great tool for us to continually improve and enhance these conversations to make them more useful for you. So we welcome that feedback. And now we'd like to officially open up the Q&A conversation. We've already started getting a number of great questions in the chat box, but for those of you who have not had a chance to share your questions and insights and thoughts about these presentations, I invite you to chime in now as well. But so some of the questions that we've already gotten, looks like we've gotten one from Peggy Sissel, who was asking, and this is a challenge I hear frequently in talking about schools and school systems reaching and engaging families with very young children in their communities. How does the school locate them to do that outreach, since those infants aren't really enrolled in the schools yet and might not be engaged in systems that make it easy for them to connect with them? So can any of you share a little bit about how schools are overcoming that challenge and identifying, reaching, and engaging these families with infants and young children?
I can start. We definitely started with families who already had older children enrolled in the elementary school as kind of our starting point when P3 began the Play and Learn group. And as word of mouth expanded, that's really how those P3 coordinators are finding new families who maybe don't have enrolled students. But we also are partnered with our Child Care Resource and Referral Agency in Multnomah County, which is a way for us to locate family-friended neighbor caregivers in given school catchment areas, and is another nice way for us to connect with caregivers of young kids.
One of the things that we did in the Omaha metro area was the home visitors would go to the local apartment complexes that were part of their school attendance area and set up a little drop and play groups, informational, just an opportunity for the families who might have young children who lived in that neighborhood to come and visit within their own area prior then to coming to school, and then building those relationships with those community local businesses that parents might be going to, or like I said, the apartment complexes, that we can go to them instead of them trying to find us. As Brook also said, the word of mouth is very vital to us. Having a home visitor it really requires that kind of entrepreneurship where they're going out there looking for those different ways to network with that school community, to engage with families who are not already connected to the school. And their comfort in doing that is critical for enrolling our families.
The other thing that I would add too is sometimes we talk about P3 organizers as really their community organizers, like that's really at the core of what their work is. And so thinking about the different cultural groups reflected in their school communities, and really thinking about where families might be located. So for example, I'm thinking about one of our schools out in East Portland, and there's a large Russian population there. And so our P3 coordinator at that site spent time at Russian churches to get to know the leaders and really understand, although she is not Russian, she tried to understand more about what might be interesting to those families and how they'd like to connect with the schools. And so really thinking about, again, like Cris mentioned, where are families and how might they best like to receive that information and connect with the school.
We have one of our schools has a food pantry that's open to anybody in the community. And so when they have parents and families come in, they really are there to interact and network and welcome the family, take notice who might be pregnant or who has a little one in tow. Another one of our schools had a community baby shower. So they had agencies that support families with young babies, and parents-to-be or parents with young children were able to come through and get baby supplies, and that was open to the whole community. Just looking at ways to connect in a positive way for families to come into the school and really start looking at school as a different place than that's where kids kindergarten go. It's where I, as a family living in this school community, can go and even just ask a simple question.
Mm-hmm. David, do you have anything to add to that from what you've seen in other communities?
You know, I would echo what Cris and Brook have said. I do remember a P3 coordinator in Multnomah County that visited a number of churches and cultural groups. So that kind of outreach, going out there in the community and finding families where they are and being, and I think that other communities that I've been in are also finding church groups to be important partners in this work. Mm-hmm. Faith-based work, faith-based organizations to be important partners in this work.
Another question we've gotten in the chat box was from Will Marie Cintron-Tyson, wondering if, how many of these projects were school initiated versus family initiated, and how you see that kind of generation taking place, how it gets started.
I can let Brook and Cris talk specifically about the pilots that they lead. I would say in general, I think more often than not, it's been a community organization, either a government agency or a community organization that has kind of that has spearheaded this work, that has championed this work, whether it's a United Way or a CAP agency. And then sometimes it's about introducing it to the district and bringing the district, sharing research, sharing the kind of concept, and then having principals and or district leaders get excited about the work from there. But I think I've seen it happen that way more often, where it's a community or a government agency that's starting the work off.
In the Omaha metro area, the conversation began among the 11 superintendents within Douglas and Sarpy County as how they could address achievement. And in their partnership with the newly founded Buffett Early Childhood Institute, it was a combination of someone giving them some ideas of how to do it a little differently so that we could really address that sooner than later and partner with families. And so I look at it from, it was the school wanting to do something but not quite sure what to do, but open to wanting to do something different. And then willing to go out on a limb and really address how they could bring in this birth and be through grade 3 and beyond to really strengthen their school communities and ultimately address the student achievement gap that we wanted to address.
And I think we were lucky enough that that our work to this point was really spurred on by investment. So first, Kellogg Foundation grant that came to our community in 2012 around community school and early childhood linkages. And then later, the state created a fund called the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Fund. And so we were able to bring together sector partners and really build on previous work and think about, learn from great work happening in our community to settle on this P3 strategy.
And maybe to Sarah, just to give maybe a couple of more examples, Cincinnati is another community that, like Multnomah County, has a system of community schools throughout the city that they call community learning centers. And those, there are nonprofits that support those community schools. And so they already kind of have that structure. They have the collaboration. They have a lot of principal and district buy-in. And then some of the nonprofits that are doing this work saw the need to extend those same services down to children ages 0 to 5. And the schools saw that same need. And so then it was a natural evolution from there to then begin extending the work. So that's just another example of kind of the trajectory that takes place.
So there's been a little bit of conversation throughout this webinar about the investment that enabled this work to spur and take off. And so Brook Smith is asking what strategies have been successful to help leverage those public dollars. I know both of the examples in Multnomah County and greater Metro Omaha, there's significant public investment in this work. So can you share a little bit with the folks on the webinar about how to leverage that, how to make the case for that kind of public investment, especially, in a lot of communities in the GLR network don't have strong public investment in the early learning years and kind of making those connections across those early learning and early grades continuum.
In the Omaha metro area, those 11 superintendents across those 2 counties were really able to collectively leverage an extra mill levy dollars from our 2 counties that were legislatively then passed down back to us. That then comes to our learning community of Douglas and Sarpy County, and the Buffett Institute then is just kind of the contractor for that. But I have to think that this was before I joined the team. When I first heard about it, to think that 11 superintendents across 2 counties would come together and not want to be competing against each other. Like, I want my school to be better than your school. They wanted to collectively do something to all the residents, all the children and family within their 2 counties. Was pretty powerful politically for them to come together to leverage their collaboration to move that forward.
Yeah, that is amazing. The fact that given the competitive nature of education and school systems, that really is amazing the way they kind of came together in such a collaborative way. Did that happen quickly? What enabled them to kind of see that bigger picture?
Sarah, I'm not sure. I think that maybe Kim Bonesteiner is on this chat. Maybe she can type and let the audience know. But that was before I benefited from their hard work before coming into the scene. So next time I get together, I'll make sure I know the answer.
Okay. We all want that magic theme.
I know.
And maybe Kate can answer the question.
I know part of it was with the Educational Consortium, the group of superintendents that met all the time. They had been doing this for over 30 years, as I understand it, and it was more sort of coming together and discussing, what was going on, not just a coffee session, but talking about real things happening. And then in the last several years, they decided, and this is sort of coming alongside the learning community, that they want to do more together as superintendents, and so then MOEC as a group, the Educational Consortium, added lift to what it's doing. So added literacy, we're going to talk about data, we're going to talk about attendance, and have all these working groups going. And then with the learning community as a citizen, we watched that be a legislative thing that covered the whole area. And then it kind of has honed into this wonderful entity looking at data and saying what's best practice and what can we do here, and then now they're doing it. I mean, just as a citizen watching, and I'm a former educator, watching that happen has been marvelous as well. It evolved from a larger scope thing and was some competition between schools, and now it has evolved to something so much more better now, much better now.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Brooke, would you like to share a little bit more about how the public investment came about in Multnomah County?
Sure. I mean, we are lucky enough to be, P3 work is building off of 20 years of public investment around the Sun Community School system. And so that, as you can imagine, has a varied history in terms of different investments at the city, county, school district partnerships. So it's a complicated web of funding, and when there have been challenges or concerns about the ability of different organizations to continue that funding, I can tell you that parents have been very loud about about the importance of Sun Community Schools, and so we've been lucky enough to maintain that funding. And then I think we have been lucky. Oregon has really been, the state has been putting a lot of attention, and we just had a historic investment in early learning this last legislative session, and have $200 million now earmarked for early learning and each year. And so the state is working on those plans. And so the Kindergarten Partnership and Innovation Fund was an early sign that the state was really interested in thinking differently about how they were investing in early childhood across our state. So so right now, I mean, we feel pretty lucky and well-resourced. We still need a lot more, but comparatively, we've been lucky.
So David, I know that obviously Cris and Brook and the communities that they represent have been very lucky in receiving the significant public investments in Multnomah County going back 20 years to support this birth through third grade effort. I'm assuming that there are probably quite a few folks on today's webinar who have not been so fortunate and who don't have that kind of significant public investment in the early years and in this kind of community schools collaborative approach, who still might want to implement something that connects the early learning and early grades with supports for families and children across that continuum. In your research, have you seen any first 10 communities that are implementing some maybe lower cost efforts as they build support for that deeper investment that we know we all need?
I have, Sarah. And so, Suzanne, to give you a heads up, if you might want to turn to that elements of a good first 10 plan slide. Oh yeah, you got it. Oh, great. So to give a little context here, I have had the opportunity to share the research that we've discussed today and the examples of Multnomah County and Metro Omaha and Cambridge and Cincinnati and other communities with a number of communities around the country, but in particular with 13 communities in Maine and 16 communities in Lancaster, in one county in Pennsylvania, Lancaster County. And to give you a little more context about those two locations, the state of Maine, the Department of Education, used its last year of preschool development grant funding to support 13 communities in engaging in this work and developing first 10 plans. So that's kind of that's a collaboration between the state and these communities, but the communities were not, they received, funding for under the first preschool development grants to have classes, and this was part of their partnership work, but they didn't receive big funds in order to implement the work. So these were relatively low resource plans. Likewise, in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the Community Action Partnership, the CAP agency, applied for monies to begin doing this work from the United Way, which had a collective impact initiative. And I know many of your campaign sites are spearheaded by United Ways. And there were 5 communities in Lancaster County that received, again, small pots of money to begin doing this work. And then the other 11 communities didn't receive funding, but were still received a lot of information and some support in developing this work. So in Maine, the communities formed partnerships, like I mentioned earlier, that included Head Start and community-based preschools and elementary schools, maybe some district support. And those teams did some self-assessment activities, looked at what's already in place, did some focus groups and identified their key needs, and then began working to develop a first 10 plan or a birth through 3rd grade plan. Likewise with the communities, they're beginning that work in Lancaster County. And so the slide that you see shares some criteria that I've kind of, that have emerged from these plans doing this work. And so you can see, does the plan reflect the full continuum? Are there strategies for children 0 to 3, for 3 to 5, and in the elementary grades, and then around transitions? And these don't have to all be expensive strategies. So I have shared the play and learn groups in Multnomah County and Metro Omaha. They have full-time personnel doing that work. But schools and communities have been able to take that idea and use existing staff, maybe paying stipends or someone part-time to run those play and learn groups. And so there are, lower cost ways of doing that. Likewise, a lot of this work, a great place to start is with developing a transition plan. There are a lot of good free resources out there for doing transition activities. And there's a great deal of low-hanging fruit in terms of bringing pre-K and K teachers together to look at curriculum assessment, to look at what's happening at the end of the pre-kindergarten year and the beginning of the kindergarten year. How are we engaging families from September that children are for that entire year, to encourage early registration and to orient them, move up days, et cetera. So where I've seen the work take place is deepening our family engagement activities, experimenting with play and learn, and then putting our heads together around aligning curriculum, teaching and learning, pre-K, and the pre-K to K. And then the last thing I would say is also looking at those K to 3 grades and making sure that that work is developmentally appropriate, looking at some of our leading edge curricula out there that are doing kindergarten and 1st grade kind of aligned with standards, but also in developmentally appropriate ways.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So we've got a question from Kelly Green, who's saying she's from a small state and community where there are some of these pieces already in place, and wondering what recommendations you may have to help her and the district leverage those existing structures and to strengthen the work that's towards the development of a hub to support children and families.
I can start with this one. I mean, one of the things that I didn't say that I'm going to answer this in 2 parts. One thing that I didn't say in response to your previous question, Sarah, that I would like to is that part of the value of developing a plan, and a focused plan, a coherent plan, a parsimonious plan that doesn't list everything under the sun, is that it's a way of getting all of your team on the same page, but it also becomes a way to share. It's a communication tool for your broader community. So then this is a plan that you can share with your superintendent, with your school committee, with your, county leaders, and it begins to show real progress. And then as you implement the components of those plans, you're able to go back and say, we have a viable partnership, we have a viable plan, we're implementing the plan, we're monitoring, we're collecting data, and that then becomes a big part of your case for further investment. So I wanted to make that link that I hadn't made before, that I think if you think about this as a multi-year process, starting with that ground level plan and then building up, it then becomes an important communication tool and an advocacy tool in your community. So that was the part A. And then the question that came from the chat box was, if I'm not mistaken, Sarah, it's around how do you take what your existing programs and services and leverage them? And I would say, again, that's part of looking at work currently underway and doing your self-assessment, looking at the other needs and the needs that your existing programs and services are addressing, and then the needs that aren't being addressed, and developing a plan that extend those. So if perhaps you have a Head Start that is doing comprehensive services well, is there a way that Head Start, maybe I've had communities do things like share a family liaison or share a comprehensive services person who already has that experience and training from Head Start, but may not, may have some additional time that a early childhood center could take advantage of, or the school could take advantage of. And then if it's about how do we leverage the existing activities, extend them, build on them, but also communicate them, again, through some type of planning document, so that the leaders in the communities can realize, well, this is what we have, and this is the next step for us. This is the next place where we should go.
I would just add to go with the willing. So really look for those districts or those principals that are excited about this work and passionate about it, who look at the babies across the street and think, oh, they're my kids. Those are places where, where you can really push the work forward, I think, when it comes to school partnerships, and not trying to do it all at once or trying to push your way into a school that's really just not ready for that work and they're overwhelmed with what they're doing right now. So find those folks who are ready and excited.
Finding that community child early learning center that is in your neighborhood and starting to reach out to them and build that partnership would be another way to pull it together too. I think too, looking at, David, your elements of a good first 10 plan, really looking at those components through a critical eye, that's that landscape assessment. I think sometimes we don't spend enough time really assessing what we're doing well and where our gaps are and who some of our natural collaborative partners are, and bringing those stakeholders to the table to really bring reflection and perspective to achieve this.
And the one other idea I would add to what Cris and Brook are saying is the idea of starting with a pilot within your community. And so it may be that you don't have the resources to create the full community partnership that Cambridge has, or to create 10 hubs, 9 or 10 hubs like Multnomah County and Metro Omaha have. But is it possible to create one school hub and to use that as an example in your community? I mentioned earlier Lancaster County and the United Way Collective Impact grant that the CAP agency received. They began with 5 communities and supporting those communities. And last May, those 5 communities shared the work that they had done with the other 11 communities in the county. And there was so much genuine, authentic interest by those 11 other communities and what the communities in Lancaster County had already been able to achieve. There was just a great deal of excitement about what those first communities had done. So I think even starting off with 1 or 2 school hubs can be a way to ignite this work.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts on that question from Brook or Cris? If not, Brook, I was wondering, you spoke a little bit about the play and learn groups earlier and talking about the real significant benefits for the children and families and also for the schools in terms of helping them build relationships and help their families feel more comfortable so that inside the schools so that they have those relationships before the children enroll. I wonder if you could also talk a little bit about the benefits that those play and learn groups have for the family child care providers that are also engaged in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the first benefit is just to reduce isolation. I think for a lot of those caregivers, they are with kids all day, and they don't often get to have adult interactions. And so for them also get to have that opportunity to build relationships in their community. And then the kaleidoscope model is really built so that all the activities are things that caregivers and parents can take home and replicate. So they don't have a lot of fancy materials or complicated instructions. It's really, they're really with simple materials and can happen anywhere. And so it provides them access to new ideas for activities, those relationships. And then as P3 coordinators get to know both caregivers and families, it's a chance for them to get connected to services. Early intervention is definitely an important key piece of play and learn groups where we P3 coordinators can have conversations with caregivers and parents about concerns that they see with particular children and getting those families, if they're interested, connecting to the services that their child might benefit from. And then I'd also highlight as P3 coordinators develop those relationships with those family, friend, and neighbor caregivers, they're able to find out what their needs are around training and support, and they've started to actually hold training through child care resource and referral at the school buildings themselves. So family, friend, and neighbor caregivers can come and get training hours and increase their training levels. And so that's just another way that we're trying to develop the system and have another place where those caregivers can come for support and access those resources.
Thanks. Yeah, that's wonderful. We've just gotten another question from Scott Felderman asking about where and when do you introduce reading improvement by 3rd grade, particularly if you are in a school district that might not be using what we know about reading science, and teachers might not actually know how to teach reading, even those teachers that have been teaching reading for many years. So how do you introduce the science around teaching and learning to read and a focus on 3rd grade reading inside of these first 10 models?
Well, I think it's when I look at our home visitors, everything they're doing in their 3 visits a month are all focused around having those little ones be successful readers by 3rd grade. And I think it's important, and when we work with the home visitors in their community of practice, that they understand the why of the what and the how, so that when they're working with families, that they can be giving real specific feedback to moms and dads and caregivers about when a child does this is going to show up in a pre-literacy skill, which will be successful reading down the road. So making those connections to what's happening in literacy development, language development, vocabulary development is critical, that we're talking about that from the moment that we start interacting with them.
And I might add to that I think one area that's very exciting in this first 10 work is when we bring together pre-kindergarten teachers, community-based preschool teachers with district pre-K and K teachers. for joint professional development. And there are logistical hurdles in doing that, obviously finding the right time of day and, is it right after school or is it at 6 o'clock at night, and do you serve pizza? But it seems that communities are able to find times to do that joint professional development. And when they do, literacy, obviously, professional development and literacy can be really powerful. And so then you're coming together as a partnership, and maybe, if your community needs to have a study group in planning that and look at some of the latest research, and then start in those early grades where you're doing developmentally appropriate, standards aligned literacy instruction. And there are models out there. I often send folks to the Boston Public Schools Early Childhood Department's focus on K-1 and focus on K-2 curricula. Those are free online curricula. Free is a little bit of a misnomer there, and that you still have to buy the trade books. And so for a lot of communities, they're not going to wholesale adapt that curriculum, but it is an example of a developmentally appropriate, standards aligned curriculum with a real focus on literacy. So that's just one. There are many others, and I see in the chat box other resources being posted. So that's great. But so perhaps a study group that then leads to that joint professional development in pre-K and K, and then you can build on that moving up to the early grades. And then, of course, building on the work that Cris and Brook have discussed in terms of play and learn groups and other supports 0 to age 3.
Great, and thank you to everyone who's been posting all of these great resources that are just flooding through the chat box. That's a wonderful resource to share, and thank you for passing that along. We are rapidly getting towards the end of our hour and a half together. Just wanted to check in with each of our wonderful presenters, see if you have any closing thoughts or comments before we begin to wrap up.
Well, I would just want to say that we see in Metro Omaha the need to just really press on getting that message out, just getting the understanding of the importance of reading, babbling to your babies, all that, because families are so caught up in else that they've sort of forgotten that. And there's no family I've ever worked with that is, coming home on purpose and saying, I'm not going to do this, reading with my darling. But we have to sort of make it important again. And so that is one of our campaign's emphasis that we consider very important, because it's just not happening, and it ought to be. And with the Buffett Foundation and the learning community and the people going into the homes, that's a really big step too in coaching, and then just, building on that family sort of muscle memory of knowing that that's important in the home.
And I would say, by way of summing up, that what I think is very exciting in these communities, in Multnomah County and Metro Omaha, but in the other communities I studied as well, is coming up with a comprehensive strategy, even if it's a first step strategy, even if it's a kind of feasible strategy for where you and your community are. But combining this idea of attending to the full continuum, and to begin thinking about what are you doing in terms of teaching and learning, what are you doing about partnering with families, and what are you doing in terms of providing comprehensive services. And moving towards that more comprehensive approach, I think, sets a community up for success and for sustaining this work over time.
Any additional comments, Cris or Brook?
I echo what David says.
Ditto.
All right, well, wonderful. Thank you all. Thank you, David, Cris, Brook, Kate, and everyone who's joined in on this conversation, sharing your ideas, your questions, and resources that you know. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us. And then Again, I'd like to just remind you, we've got up on the screen the wonderful list of additional webinars that are already scheduled for this month. I hope you will make plans to join us same day of the week, same time for the next several weeks, as well as we've got some other great conversations that are scheduled for November and December as well. So thank you so much for being a part of this network, and we look forward to learning with you again soon. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.